Can people be good without God? What makes a person good? Is it faith? Is it fear? Is it rules written long before we were born? Every society has wrestled with that question, because if morality really depends on God, then what happens when faith fades? Do we lose our compass or finally learn to steer for ourselves? Some say without God, the world would descend into chaos. That belief is the only thing keeping people from destroying each other. But if that were true, why do we see compassion in unbelievers and cruelty in those who claim to serve the divine? Maybe the real story of morality isn't written in the heavens at all. Maybe it's written in us, in the heart, the conscience, and the courage to care. I'm Darante LaMar, and in partnership with the American Humanist Association, we're asking one of humanity's oldest and most urgent questions. Can we be good without God? Let's talk about it. We've all heard it before, that without God, morality collapses. That if people stopped believing in a higher power, the world would fall apart. Everyone would lie, cheat, steal, become addicts, and kill without restraint. But here's what's interesting. Most of us already know good people who don't believe and bad people who do. That tells us something. It tells us that morality doesn't come from belief alone. It comes from being human, from the part of us that feels empathy, that wrestles with conscience, that knows what it's like to be hurt and to hurt. Being good without God doesn't mean being against God. It means being for goodness. It means choosing compassion, fairness, and integrity, not because we're afraid of punishment or hoping for reward, but because we recognize our shared humanity. Greg Epstein, a humanist chaplain at Harvard, he wrote Good Without God to answer a question people rarely ask out loud. What if morality isn't something we borrow from heaven, but what if it's something we build together right here on earth? He wasn't arguing against faith, he was affirming humanity, that goodness can outlast belief and maybe even shine brighter without it. When we ask, can we be good without God, what we're really asking is something deeper. Can we trust humanity to guide itself? For centuries, religion has claimed the moral high ground, but every day millions of people live with integrity, compassion, and purpose without invoking the supernatural. And that's the beauty of humanism. It reminds us that morality doesn't have to come from above. It can rise from within us and between us. If you believe that reason and empathy are enough to build an ethical life, then you might already be a humanist. That's where the American Humanist Association comes in. The AHA is the nation's oldest and largest organization advancing humanist values, a worldview grounded in science, compassion, and community. For nearly a century, they've been proving that goodness isn't dependent on divine command. It's sustained by our shared humanity. They advocate for church-state separation, human rights, and ethical living. From defending reproductive freedom and LGBTQ+ equality to protecting students from forced prayer in public schools, the AHA is helping people across the country build meaningful lives, not through fear of punishment or promise of reward, but through a deep commitment to one another. For me, that's what humanism is all about. Not tearing down belief, but building up people. I value the AHA because they show the world that good without God isn't a contradiction. It's a calling. They don't just talk about values, they live them. They defend our freedoms, celebrate our compassion, and remind us that morality belongs to all of us, believers and non-believers alike. If you want to explore what it means to live ethically and meaningfully without religion, visit the American Humanist Association today. Click the link or scan the QR code to learn more, join, or connect with others who share your values. I'm proud to be a member and proud to partner with the AHA on this video, because together we're proving that being good without God isn't just possible, it's powerful. So the leading current assumption is that humans cannot be good without gods. But if that's true, then what's happening when an atheist helps a stranger or when a Christian commits a crime? Are they acting outside their belief system or revealing what morality really is? A human thing. This is not just a theological question. It's a psychological and sociological one. It asks, where does moral behavior actually come from? How does belief or disbelief shape moral reasoning? What does human behavior tell us about the real origins of morality? Moral behavior precedes belief systems. Evolutionary psychology and cognitive neuroscience show that our sense of fairness, empathy, and cooperation is rooted in innate social cognition, not divine command. Humans experience moral judgments first as gut reactions, empathic or disgust-based, then rationalize them afterward. This happens across belief systems, which means morality is embodied, not revealed. The ability to imagine another's mental state is foundational to empathy and pro-social behavior, observable in children as early as age 2 before any formal teaching about God or sin can set in. Moral emotions like guilt and shame evolve to maintain cooperation in social groups, not to please a deity, but to sustain trust and cohesion. Helping a stranger or feeling remorse doesn't require theology. It requires recognizing another person's experience as real. So when an atheist acts compassionately, they're not violating a moral vacuum. They're expressing the psychological machinery that makes morality possible for everyone. From a sociological standpoint, morality is not a static list of divine decrees. It's a dynamic system of norms that emerge from communal life. Emil Durkheim argued that morality is the glue that binds societies. Its origin lies in social solidarity, the shared agreements that allowed humans to live cooperatively. Religion, in his view, codifies morality, but it doesn't create it. It was Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman who explained how values and truths are socially constructed, meaning morality is negotiated through shared meaning, not handed down whole from above. And Albert Bandura found that moral behavior is learned through modeling, reinforcement, and identification, not revelation. We internalize moral codes by observing how others are treated for their actions. Robert Bellah, in his 1967 work Civil Religion in America, suggested that even secular societies form civil religions, collecting moral narratives that sanctify civic values like justice, liberty, or equality. These moral structures exist independently of supernatural belief. Religion may organize moral instincts, but it's human society that generates them. So morality, at its core, is a social survival strategy, not a divine imposition. Now the critical question becomes even sharper. If belief guarantees morality, then how do we explain moral failures among the faithful and moral integrity among the non-religious? Empirical studies support this tension. Scandinavian nations like Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, they are among the least religious, yet consistently rank highest in global measures of ethics, trust, and social warfare. Religious priming studies suggest that moral behavior increases when people believe they're being watched, whether by God or surveillance. This implies some religious moral behavior is externally motivated, not internally cultivated. And then Alpert and Ross's intrinsic versus extrinsic religiosity found that those who internalize compassion as a value are more consistently moral than those who treat religion as a social identity, meaning the moral compass depends more on character formation than creedal subscription. Moral development theorists like Lawrence Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan describe morality as a developmental process. Early morality is fear-based. Mature morality is principle-based. Belief systems often anchor early-stage morality, but humanism encourages higher-stage morality. Gilligan's ethics of care suggests that mature morality is relational, defined by empathy, care, and responsibility rather than rigid rules. This reframes goodness as a tuned connection, not compliance. What a relief. So leaving theistic frameworks doesn't strip morality. It can actually advance it from obedience to conscience. If belief is what makes us good, how do we explain goodness that happens outside belief? Psychologists show that empathy is wired into the human brain long before doctrine defines it. Sociologists reminds us that moral order isn't given from heaven. It's negotiated right here on earth between people learning to live together. Religion may have shaped our moral language, but humanity wrote the code. We were moral long before we were believers. So when an atheist helps a stranger or when a believer harms one, those moments don't prove or disprove faith. They reveal something deeper. That goodness isn't about who we worship, but about how we treat one another. Morality isn't sacred because it's divine. It's sacred because it's human. Long before Christianity, People were forming codes of fairness and compassion. The Egyptians had ma'at, the Greeks had virtue ethics, the Chinese had Confucian humanism. Even tribal societies without any concept of God had moral systems built on reciprocity and community survival. For the Egyptians, order was morality. From as early as 2600 BCE, the key idea was morality as cosmic and social balance. Ma'at represented truth, balance, justice, and right order. Egyptians believed the universe itself depended on maintaining Ma'at, not to appease gods, but to sustain harmony between people, nature, and the very cosmos. Pharaohs were the guardians of Ma'at, responsible for fairness in law and justice. Common people practiced Ma'at through honesty, charity, and humility. Ma'at was less a theology than a moral ecology. It established the idea that right living preserves social equilibrium. This prefigures modern social contract theory, morality as the maintenance of collective stability. But then look at Greek virtue ethics. From as early as 500 BCE, where the key idea were ethics rooted in human flourishing, not divine obedience. Socrates challenged blind tradition by asking why something is good, introducing moral reasoning as dialogue. Plato explored justice as harmony within the soul and society, not fear of punishment, and Aristotle grounded morality in virtue, habits of good character cultivated through practice, reason, and community. We become just by doing just acts. That was Aristotle. This maps directly to modern behavioral psychology. Virtue as learned habit through reinforcement rather than innate purity or divine decree. Greek ethics shifted moral authority from heaven to human reason, a monumental step toward humanism. And then from as early as the 6th century BCE, Confucian humanism framed morality as relationship, where ethics were seen as social harmony through empathy and respect. Confucius defined morality not by belief in gods, but by practicing Ren, benevolence, humanity, and empathy. The focus was on right relationships between parent and child, ruler and subject, friend and friend. Rituals and propriety were not divine commands, but social technologies, ways to cultivate mutual respect and social order. Confucian ethics revealed that morality can thrive without any concept of deity, sustained entirely by human relational consciousness. It's one of history's clearest examples of secular moral philosophy in practice. But we can even consider indigenous and tribal moralities. Long before literacy or empire, hunter-gatherer and tribal societies organized around reciprocal altruism, moral systems built on trust and mutual aid. Anthropologists showed that early human communities developed ethical norms through exchange, reciprocity, and obligation, not religious doctrine. Shared rituals of giving, mourning, and care reinforced group cohesion and survival. Punishment and reputation management maintained fairness, early precursors to legal systems. Morality evolved as a social adaptation, a way to manage risk and ensure cooperation. Long before people said, God sees you, communities said, we see each other. Philosopher Karl Jaspers called this era the axial age, when civilizations across the world independently developed higher moral reflection. In Greece, we saw this with the rational ethics through Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In India, we saw this through ahimsa, nonviolence in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. In China, we saw this in Confucianism and Taoism, emphasizing virtue and harmony. Even in Israel, we saw prophetic ethics emphasizing justice and compassion for the marginalized. Morality matured globally, not through revelation, but through collective introspection. Different cultures asked the same human question: what does it mean to live well together? That's not theology, that's anthropology. Franz de Waal observed proto-moral behaviors in primates: empathy, fairness, reconciliation, showing morality as biological cooperation, not divine concession. Edward Wilson, in sociobiology, described moral norms as adaptive strategies for group survival. Norizanian and Sharif argued that big gods may have reinforced moral behavior, but they didn't create it. They amplified already existing social instincts. Morality predates gods in both timeline and function. Religion refined moral storytelling, but humanity invented moral structure. Long before there were churches, temples, or sacred texts, People were already forming moral worlds. The Egyptians called it ma'at, the balance that kept the universe fair. The Greeks called it virtue, the practice of becoming good through reason. The Chinese called it ren, the compassion that binds us to one another. Across the globe, long before anyone said God is good, humans were saying, let's be good to each other. Morality didn't descend from heaven. It emerged from the human heart, from empathy, cooperation, and the courage to live together. So when we talk about morality, we're not talking about something borrowed from belief. We're talking about something built by humanity. Religion may have carried morality symbols, but humanity carried its soul. If being good requires belief in God, then do good deeds by non-believers mean nothing? And if belief guarantees goodness, how do we explain wars, slavery, and oppression justified in God's name? This question exposes a philosophical double bind. If morality depends on belief, then goodness is exclusive. Only believers qualify as moral. Yet, if believers commit atrocities, the link between faith and morality collapses. This is what philosophers call moral dissonance, when reality refuses to fit our metaphysical narrative. Consider this quote: is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? This question from 2,400 years ago still dismantles divine command morality. If morality depends on God's will, it's arbitrary. If goodness exists independently, then God is not its source, only its witness. Immanuel Kant argued morality is grounded in rational autonomy, the ability to recognize and act on universal moral law through reason. A good will is not good because of what it affects, but because of its willing. Morality in this view is not obedience, but self-governed duty. Nietzsche turned the critique sharper, calling Christian morality a slave morality, born of fear and guilt. His challenge wasn't to do away with ethics, but to reclaim them as acts of creative will rather than divine submission. Across centuries, philosophy has consistently moved morality from authority to autonomy. When people hold conflicting ideas, the mind seeks to reduce the tension by rationalizing. They may say things like they're secretly believers or their goodness doesn't count. That inner discomfort is a symptom of worldview maintenance, not truth. Humans justify immoral actions when they believe they serve a higher cause. This explains how wars, slavery, and oppression can be rationalized as God's will. Faith can comfort the conscience, even when the action contradicts compassion. Belief systems can amplify morality or absolve it, depending on whether responsibility is internalized or outsourced to authority. Sociologist Peter Berger called religion a sacred canopy, a moral order that shields societies from chaos, but when the canopy becomes rigid, it can justify moral blind spots. Crusades and colonialism framed as divine missions, slavery defended through scripture, and patriarchy and exclusion enforced as holy order. Durkheim would argue these actions are not violations of religion, but expressions of collective morality gone tribal, loyalty to the group over empathy for outsiders. Religion often provides the moral language, but not the moral substance. The same texts that inspire compassion have also been used to sanctify cruelty. Modern humanist ethics emphasize that goodness doesn't require metaphysical permission. Secular societies consistently rank higher in measures of trust, equality, and well-being. Moral motivation, according to social psychologists like Jonathan Haidt, arises from emotion and empathy, not doctrine. When empathy is cultivated directly, moral action follows without appeal to the supernatural. If faith makes us good, what happens when faith becomes the excuse for harm? History gives us a strange pattern: people killing in the name of peace, enslaving in the name of order, silencing in the name of truth. Philosophy calls this cognitive dissonance, when our stories about goodness no longer fit our actions. Because if goodness needs a God to exist, then every good atheist is a contradiction, and every cruel believer is an anomaly. But maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe morality was never about belief at all. Maybe it was about responsibility. Not what we worship, but how we treat one another when no one's watching. Faith can inspire goodness, but it can't monopolize it. And disbelief doesn't erase morality. It reveals where it truly begins. Goodness lives in the space between power and empathy, the place where we choose humanity over hierarchy. Morality isn't a divine download, it's an evolved sense of empathy. We survive by cooperation, we thrive by compassion. Our conscience isn't proof of God, it's proof of us, of what humans are capable of when we care beyond ourselves. Modern psychology shows that our moral sense is natural, not supernatural. Franz de Waal's primate studies demonstrate empathy, fairness, and reconciliation in chimpanzees and bonobos, suggesting morality predates religion and even humanity. Neuroscience identifies mirror neurons that allow us to feel another's pain or joy, the neurological seed of ethical behavior. Compassion is not learned from heaven, it's wired for survival. Daniel Goleman describes emotional intelligence as the capacity to regulate one's emotions and respond empathetically, the cornerstone of moral maturity. Moral action is not just knowing what's right, but feeling it, a blend of cognition and empathy. Self-determination theory shows that people act ethically when driven by intrinsic values like compassion and fairness, not extrinsic rewards like divine approval. We don't need surveillance to do good. We need solidarity. The desire to do good is not proof of divine influence. It's evidence of our capacity for emotional and moral growth. Humans are moral because we are social. Emil Durkheim taught that moral norms are collective representations, shared agreements that make cooperation possible. Robert Putnam's social capital theory confirms that trust, empathy, and civic engagement strengthen moral communities, religious or not. Moral systems evolve to balance freedom and responsibility within social groups. Nearly every culture develops some form of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. From Confucius Ren to African Ubuntu, I am because we are. Morality emerges as mutual recognition, not divine revelation. This is sociology's great insight. Morality is not obedience, it's relationship. As sociologist Phil Zuckerman notes in Living the Secular Life, secular people often express moral meaning through community engagement, environmental concern, and human rights. Moral societies are built through cultural reinforcement, art, story, law, and empathy, not theology. We don't need belief to be bound. We need belonging. Humanism transforms morality from a creed into a culture. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that in a godless universe, we become radically responsible, no longer able to outsource our ethics to authority. Albert Camus called this the revolt of the absurd, choosing goodness anyway, not because it's required, but because it's right. Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach roots ethics in human flourishing, the real measurable well-being of others. Humanist ethics hold that moral worth arises from the ability to reduce suffering and enhance well-being through reason and compassion. As Greg Epstein wrote, being good without God doesn't mean being against God. It means being for goodness. It's not about rejecting divinity. It's about reclaiming agency. When morality is freed from divine decree, it becomes a conscious act of creation, an art form of ethical existence. Across disciplines, biology, psychology, sociology, philosophy, the conclusion is consistent. Morality emerges wherever humans form community. It's not the product of revelation, but of relationship. Not obedience, but empathy. Not surveillance, but conscience. Humanism doesn't erase moral purpose. It clarifies it. It makes morality an act of choice, not compliance. If morality doesn't come from God, it doesn't mean it comes from nowhere. It comes from here, from us, from that moment when a parent sacrifices for their child, when strangers help in a disaster, when people stand up for justice knowing that it could cost them everything. That's not divinity. That's humanity at its finest. The philosopher Camus said, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." That's what humanism is, the discovery that goodness doesn't need permission. Our empathy is the evidence. Our cooperation is the proof. Our morality isn't handed down. It's built up, one act of compassion at a time. So when we say we're good without God, we're not declaring war on belief. We're affirming belief in one another. We're saying that humanity has always had the capacity for good, and that maybe, just maybe, that's sacred enough. So maybe the real question isn't, can we be good without God? Maybe it's, can we finally be good for each other? At its core, this question speaks to the evolution of moral consciousness, from individual virtue to collective ethics. True morality emerges in authentic encounter when we treat the other not as an object, but as a counterpart. To be good for each other is to honor the humanity in one another without needing divine mediation. Morality begins in the face of the other, the infinite responsibility awakened when we recognize another person's vulnerability. Goodness is not belief, it's responsibility. Ethical progress is measured not by theology, but by how societies expand human flourishing, dignity, justice, education, love, and health. Being good for each other is the moral work of improving conditions for life itself. Morality reaches maturity when it shifts from obedience to ideals to responsibility for others. Social psychology and neuroscience affirm what humanism intuits. Our moral instincts are relational. Ethical growth is a developmental process. We mature morally as we expand the circle of those we consider us. We don't need temples to hold meaning. We need spaces where meaning is practiced. That's what BridgeCity, the AHA, and the modern humanist movement all embody. A moral community built on consent, curiosity, and care. Greg Epstein, the humanist chaplain at Harvard, wrote Good Without God to remind us that goodness isn't a gift we receive, it's a responsibility we share. He said humanism isn't about what we don't believe, it's about what we do, building compassion, creating meaning, and living as though people matter. That's what this community is about. We don't gather because we've been commanded to. We gather because we care to, because we've seen what happens when people stop waiting for heaven and start building it together. To be humans is to be unfinished, and that means morality isn't something we inherit. It's something we improve and improvise together. Every time you choose kindness over cruelty, comprehension over certainty, and compassion over comfort, you're proving that we can be good for each other. That's the work. That's the movement. That's humanism. We don't have to look up to find goodness. We can find it every time we look around, in the eyes, the hands, and hearts of one another. The question was never whether we can be good without God. The real question is whether we'll be courageous enough to be good with each other. Now, if you want to explore what it means to live ethically and meaningfully without religion, visit the American Humanist Association today. Click the link or scan the QR code to learn more, join, or connect with others who share your values. I'm proud to be a member and proud to partner with the AHA on this video, because together we're proving that being good without God isn't just possible, it's powerful. As a matter of fact, if you're interested in some dope new merch, the AHA and I have partnered with the new Bridges Over Altars design. Head over to the store to get yours today. It's an easy way to promote the values of humanism while supporting the organizations and leaders that are paving the way. And if you'd like to see more content like this in your feed, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video with your network of community and friends. Thank you for joining me today, and as always, until next time, keep rising.